I bet. I don't doubt that, actually. Good evening, friends. I'll invite you to take your seats if you haven't already. If you are joining us here in our Perlman Sanctuary at North Shore Congregation Israel in person, we are so glad you're here. If you're joining us online, wherever you are, we are so glad you're here. It's my honor and real privilege to be able to, on behalf of our synagogue, welcome everyone here to this Joseph Cardinal Bernardin Jerusalem lecture. I believe it's the 19th, am I? Oh, 27th, I'm so sorry. The 27th, actually, of here. We at North Shore Congregation Israel have not been the host site for this before, but we are honored to be one of the host sites alternating every year in between the Jewish community and the Catholic community, and really honored to be this year's host site. For those that may not know, this lecture is an annual series that continues and enriches the relationship between the Jews and the Catholics with an annual lecture on the theological issues affecting their communities. And I would just say, I was sharing this with a class here earlier at the synagogue, but it seems that this year, that message of the importance of being in relationship with one another, the Jewish community and the Catholic community, seems more important than ever. And so we are, I think, on behalf of the Jewish community, really grateful to the Chicago Archdiocese for letting us be a part of this experience, and certainly always grateful for the partnership and friendship that the Archdiocese provides to the Jewish community, and we hope vice versa. We were sharing earlier that Chicago really stands out, really among the entire country as a model for what's possible when it comes to building strong, not just interfaith dialogue, but I'd like to say and think friendship amongst our community, and we hope that those bonds remain strong. Friends are needed in so many ways, now more than ever. The history of this lecture commemorates Joseph Cardinal Bernardin's voyage to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, accompanied by Catholic and Jewish leaders. On March 23, 1995, Cardinal Bernardin delivered a lecture entitled Anti-Semitism, the Historical Legacy and the Continuing Challenge for Christians in the Senate Hall at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. The lecture was the centerpiece of his visit to Israel, and upon returning to the U.S., Cardinal Bernardin established an annual lecture to continue the high level of conversation between our communities around theological issues affecting their relationship. And thus, we arrive at this opportunity this evening. Just so you have a sense of what is going to unfold, we'll hear introductory remarks from our good friend, His Eminence, Cardinal Cupich. We are so glad to have him back in our community. He spoke here 8 years ago, about something like that, and think how much the world has changed since then. Goodness, it was a real blessing for our community to have Cardinal Cupich with us then, and he is ever a good friend to our community here and the broader Jewish community in Chicago. So Cardinal Cupich, we are so glad you are here. After his remarks, we will welcome really our keynote speaker, Dr. Mary Boyes. For those of you who have been at North Shore Congregation Israel for many years, you may remember Dr. Boyes, who spoke here, we think 21 or 2 years ago, at an interfaith lecture here at the congregation, and my predecessor, Rabbi Steve Mason, was sharing how memorable that lecture was just the other day, and so we are thrilled to welcome her back as well. Cardinal Cupich, just by way of a brief introduction, was appointed by Pope Francis as the 9th Archbishop of Chicago in 2014, as well as to the Dicastery for Bishops in 2016, and the Dicastery for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments in 22. He serves on the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Committee on Migration, and the Subcommittee for the Church in Central and Eastern Europe. He is a consultant to the USCCB Committee on Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs and is co-chair of the National Dialogue Initiative with Muslims. And I mentioned this before, but I think it is certainly worth mentioning again that really more than anything, he is a good friend and is there when we ask him to be, and when we don't ask him to be. He knows how to be present. And if the heart of friendship is about meeting each other, not just when you call upon one another, but seeking to let your presence be known in all times, then certainly he meets that definition, and we are lucky to have him here. Professor Mary C. Boyes is the Skinner and McAlpin Professor of Practical Theology at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, as well as its former academic vice president and dean. Having previously served as a professor at Boston College, she is the author of 6 books, including Redeeming Our Sacred Story, The Death of Jesus, and Relations Between Jews and Christians. She is also editor or co-editor of 4 other books, as well as numerous articles and book chapters. Boyes is the recipient of honorary doctorates, and I think you may be the only person who spans this list that I am about to offer, from Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, the Catholic Theological Union, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, Gratz College, and Misericordia University. She is the current chair of the Committee on Ethics, Religion, and the Holocaust at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. as well. A Seattle native, she has been a vowed member since 1968 of the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary, a congregation of Roman Catholic women. We are so glad you are here, Dr. Boyes, and it's my pleasure to invite His Eminence Cardinal Cupich up to offer a formal introduction.
Well, good evening, everyone. You know, it's always a joy for me to be among friends, and as I look around this room this evening, I can see that I really am with friends as we come together for this 27th annual Joseph Cardinal Bernardin Jerusalem Lecture. My thanks to Rabbi Wendy Geffen and all here at the North Shore Congregation Israel, the rabbis, the cantors, and all the staff and members of this beautiful synagogue which so warmly welcomes us this evening, and also for the hard work of planning this night. I also want to recognize the longstanding partners of the Archdiocese in supporting this annual lecture series: the American Jewish Community, the Anti-Defamation League, Catholic Theological Union, the Chicago Board of Rabbis, DePaul University, the Jewish Federation of Metropolitan Chicago, and Spiritus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership. The fact that so many institutions in our city come together to plan and implement this yearly gathering is a great blessing, but also it's a sign of hope. Encounters like these contribute so much to improving our mutual understanding of one another and give Jews and Catholics a regular forum to build relationships of trust and friendship. We are blessed to have as our speaker tonight Professor Mary C. Boyes. I believe that the first time we met was when we both were, first of all, members of the Board of Trustees for the Pontifical College Josephinum in Jerusalem, in Columbus, Ohio, and also after I became rector. In many ways, she was my boss for a while. Over the years, Professor Boyes has earned the reputation of being a trusted and highly respected scholar of Jewish Catholic traditions and relationships. She comes to us at a timely, albeit difficult moment, to speak about our connection as Jews and Catholics through the person of Jesus of Nazareth. Mary, thank you for being with us tonight and offering tonight's lecture. It is good to see you again. Friendship and trust are important realities to lean on in troubled times. You don't need to tell me that you find these days very difficult and a challenging moment. It's true that in such periods, relationships can become strained, and trust is often put to the test. Past traumas can resurface, and doubts of sincerity can creep into even the closest of relationships. But relationships, especially when they are strong and have been proven over time, can be a reminder of the value of walking together, keeping in mind how we have benefited from our commitments to one another and how our friendships have been so enriching as we work for the kind of peace that is built upon justice. The recent public exchange of messages between Pope Francis and Professor Karma Ben Yohanan, along with 4 other Jewish scholars, including our esteemed local colleague, Dr. Malka Simkovich, comes to mind in this moment. Not wanting disagreements to create divisions among us, Pope Francis took an initiative and reached out as a friend of the Jewish people, telling them, "Together, Jews and Catholics, we must commit ourselves to this path of friendship, solidarity, and cooperation in seeking ways to repair a destroyed world, working together in every part of the world, and especially in the Holy Land, to recover the ability to see in the face of every person the image of God in which we were created." You know, a short time later, the Jewish scholars graciously replied by saying, "The Church's effort to cultivate understanding where there once was rivalry, friendship where there was once animosity, and empathy where there was once contempt, has transformed our communities and left an everlasting imprint on our histories. We find in Your Holiness's message and letter an affirmation of this commitment, ever more significant at this time when instability threatens even relationships which have been cultivated for many decades. We extend an invitation to the Church to broaden the dialogue between us and reveal more of its boundless treasures." I have been told that it's hazardous to claim that any one Jew or even a distinguished group of Jews speaks for the whole of the people. However, I find personally in this invitation a way forward as friends, especially during these very distressing days. Tonight's lecture, an outgrowth of long-standing relationship between Jews and Catholics in Chicago, is a concrete response to this invitation to broaden our dialogue. It is also an opportunity for me publicly to reaffirm the commitment of the Archdiocese of Chicago to cultivate understanding, friendship, and empathy that has the power to transform our communities. Likewise, we remain committed to combating anti-Semitism in all of its pernicious forms. These promises do not presume that we will always agree on matters of policies or implementations, particularly during times of war and conflict. They do mean, however, that we remain committed as friends to seek a just and peaceful future together. It is apparent that October 7, 2023 will mark a new epoch in the life of Israel and the Jewish people. Let me again offer my condolences for all who have died and continue to suffer to this attack, which is worthy of every condemnation. I join my voice to so many others calling for the release of hostages and the increase of humanitarian aid to those in dire need of it. I join the Holy Father in praying for an end to the ongoing violence in the region and for a lasting peace to take root in Israel, Gaza, and the Palestinian territories. As we continue to draw upon the legacy of Joseph Cardinal Bernardin's original Jerusalem lecture in 1995, it is of value to revisit his powerful and prophetic speech. I will let his final words from nearly 3 decades ago now close my remarks as I present to you our speaker this evening. Here in Jerusalem, the Cardinal said, where the vision of peace may seem far off at times, there is a need to find ways to cooperate for the development of a genuine peace among Christians, Jews, and Muslims, Arabs, and Israelis, that includes living faith communities with full opportunity for economic justice. Jerusalem, my brothers and sisters, cannot become a mere monument to peace. It must be a true city of living communities of peace, a true Neve Shalom. That is my prayer. That is my hope. That is my dream. We now are privileged to hear more of that dream from Dr. Blase.
Friends, just before Dr. Blase begins, you may have noticed that there is a card and a pencil at your seat. That is for the Q&A, which will follow her remarks. This is a Q&A for Dr. Blase. Cardinal Cupich is just here to be the introductory remarks this evening, so please direct your questions. And by questions, it is a Q for you, A for Dr. Blase. So please do not put the A where the Q should be, otherwise it will not be read, okay? So as you write your Qs for the Q&A, feel free to just keep that card with you, and then when her remarks conclude, we'll invite you to raise your hand and we'll collect those, and we'll take a few minutes in community to see what we can get through, and then return to our Q&A through the conclusion of the program. Dr. Blase.
Thank you for your warm welcome, Rabbi Geffen, members of the North Shore Congregation Israel. To you, Cardinal Cupich. I'm touched that for a fleeting moment I was your boss. But that was then and this is now. I'm very pleased also to have been brought here under the auspices of the Ecumenical Office of the Archdiocese of Chicago, with Dr. Dan Olson and Susan Pudlarek, so thank you for having me, and a very lovely lunch that we had together. So my topic this evening is recovering a Jewish Jesus, an imperative for the church. And it is done in remembrance of Joseph Cardinal Bernardin, 1928 to 1996. This evening, as we gather together, we do so in unsettled and fractious times. Yet we do so in remembrance of a man who, despite considerable criticism and evidence to the contrary, nevertheless kept hope alive, a hope that reconciliation and peacemaking were always possible. So even as we acknowledge the difficult and complicated realities that weigh on us, including deeply felt, distinctive perspectives that threaten to divide us from one another, may this evening enable us all to have hope renewed. In his 1995 Jerusalem lecture, Cardinal Bernardin addressed, as Rabbi Geffen read, the topic of anti-Semitism, the historical legacy, and the continuing challenge for Christians. 29 years later, amid the fault lines exposed by the Hamas-Israel war and the resurgence of global anti-Semitism, we may well be tempted to despair. May the memory of Cardinal Bernardin's life of commitment to reconciliation be for us a blessing, not only for this evening, but for our lives together in these unsettled and fractious times. In the initial section of my lecture, I will speak to what I consider to be among the most important developments in Christian theology today, namely integrating knowledge of the Jewishness of Jesus into our lives as Christians. It is this renewed recognition that allows us to experience aspects of the depths of Jewish life, not only in the past, but in the present. This renewed recognition also enables us Christians to better understand our distinctive religious journey as disciples of Jesus Christ, the Jew from Nazareth. I will develop this topic in 3 sections. First, recognizing the Jewish Jesus of the Gospels. Second, understanding why and, and how the church lost sight of the Jewish Jesus. And third, recovering the significance of the Jewish Jesus. In the concluding section of my talk, part 2, I will turn directly to the topic of anti-Semitism, as the Cardinal once said, a continuing challenge for Christians, and how the memory of the Jewish Jesus speaks to the current moment. So, part 1, the Jewish Jesus. In recognizing the Jewish Jesus, we begin with the Gospels, written some 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus, in which we've already made a transition from Hebrew or Aramaic as the dialect of everyday speech into Greek, and from the scriptures in Hebrew to the scriptures, the Septuagint, in Greek. So there are major transitions that happen just from the time of Jesus to the composition of the Gospels. Now, according to Luke's Gospel, Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day. That is, he underwent the ritual by which males entered the people of the covenant. Jesus was born at a particular time and place, that is, in the diverse world of Second Temple Judaism, roughly a 600-year period between 500 before the Common Era to 70 of the Common Era. He lived in the not-so-important village in Galilee, called Nazareth. He kept Sabbath, that is, he observed a weekly time when he ceased from working. Perhaps his mode of Sabbath observance differed in some respects from others, but there was no uniformity of practice in this regard. He lived by a calendar of fasts and festivals that structured his days and weeks. And Jesus seems to have been so immersed in his Jewish world that we have very little indication of extended interaction with Gentiles, with non-Jews. And when he did encounter Gentiles, it sometimes led to new insights about the meaning of Torah, such as his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman recounted in the Gospel of Mark and told with some differences in Matthew. The Gospels bear witness to his passion for pursuing Torah's meaning in a new time, a fervor that fueled his debates with contemporaries. Like some of his Jewish near contemporaries, he was a charismatic, itinerant preacher and healer, like Hanina ben Dosa and Honi the circle drawer. It is in his discussions and disputes about interpreting Torah that we see Jesus engaging in a characteristically Jewish mode, namely contending with others who understood Torah differently. To debate Torah was to honor its significance for daily living. And memorably for us Christians, he identified the heart of Torah as he saw it. When a scribe asked him which commandment was the greatest of all, he cited both Deuteronomy and Leviticus. The first is, Jesus said, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Now, to understand how these recent first century texts resonate today in our time, consider this recent formulation. And here I quote, "Jesus is the living Torah of God. Torah and Christ are the locus of the presence of God in the world as this presence is experienced in the respective Jewish and Christian communities." I'm inserting Jewish and Christian because that's the sense of the paragraph. This is taken from a statement from the Vatican called "The Gifts and Calling of God Are Irrevocable," issued in 2015 for the 50th anniversary of the document of the Second Vatican Council, Nostra Aetate. Jesus is the living Torah of God. I'll come back to that. Section 2, losing sight of the Jewish Jesus. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, however, the educated followers of Christ, or some educated followers of Christ, gave little, if any, attention to the Jewishness of Jesus. Now, we can only infer some of the reasons, particularly their perceived need to differentiate themselves from other Jews, from Jews. This is a time when identity is very much overlapping and problematic. And differentiation came in part because they shared certain sacred texts with Jews, but they differed in that, as they perceived it, the Jewish lack of acceptance of the way of Jesus to them seemed erroneous. Now, this is not a huge number, but these are people who were the intellectual elite who produced texts. We don't have any polls to know what the people thought, if indeed polls really get at what people think. So a case in point comes from the most extensive document in nascent Christianity, the document from Justin Martyr, known as the Dialogue with Trypho, probably around the middle of the 2nd centuries, 150 to 160. This was a very tumultuous time for Jews. Their temple had been destroyed in 70 by the Romans, and whose hopes had been crushed in the Bar Kokhba uprising in 135, ultimately resulting in the expulsion of Jews from Judea and Roman colonization of the land. Some Christ followers, Justin included, interpreted these defeats as the end of Judaism, not realizing ways in which Jewish life was flourishing in the diaspora. Now, in retrospect, we can see that Justin established grounds for argumentation. He was, by training, a philosopher. So he argues in a particular way according to his Greco-Roman background. Now, he had no authority beyond his own writings. Nevertheless, his texts survive, and texts that survive tend to, just by existence, take on a certain life in centuries to come. And I believe that traces of the borderlines that he drew continue to linger in many Christian theologies today, particularly in his audacious assertion to Trypho, the Jew, that your scriptures, that is the Jewish Bible, not yet called that, are no longer yours but ours. For we believe and obey them, whereas you, though you read them, do not grasp their spirit. Justin's primary argument with Trypho was that Jews do not regard Jesus as the Messiah of Israel. Trypho's teachers, he says, in an act of enormous chutzpah, were ignorant of the meaning of scriptures. They, the teachers, and therefore Trypho, the student, simply do not grasp the meaning of Scripture, failing to see that the prophets speak of Christ. Justin continues, the lawgiver has come, and you do not see him. The poor have the gospel preached to them, the blind see, yet you don't understand. In other words, Christ, as lawgiver, has in effect replaced Moses. Now, it's apparent from this text that Justin knew relatively little about how Jews actually observed or practiced Torah. Those practices he was aware of, circumcision and Shabbat, he harshly criticized. For instance, he says to Trypho, what you really need is another circumcision, though you prize that of the flesh. Circumcision, the philosopher opined, was given as a distinguishing mark to set you off from other nations and from us Christians. This is partly a way of arguing around the fact that in the Gospels, Jesus is circumcised, but it doesn't really mean circumcision. It means of the spirit, of the heart. Circumcision was just a type. It foreshadowed the true circumcision by which we are circumcised from error and wickedness through our Lord Jesus Christ. The followers of Christ, he continued, have the salutary circumcision, namely that of the heart. And God, he says, commanded circumcision, Sabbaths, sacrifices, oblations, and festivals because of the Jews' hardness of heart. What I taught in Boston, that was hardness of heart. But so what in effect Justin does is that he sees that the cultic dimension of Torah is irrelevant, and in Christ it's the ethical demands that are fulfilled. So what he proclaims is that the law promulgated at Horeb is already obsolete and was only intended for Jews. Now, if you're thinking this is just 100 years after Jesus, more or less, and even less time since the writing of the Gospels, although to what extent he had access to codices of the Gospel are debated. But he clearly sets the law of Christ over against the older law, the now obsolete law in his perspective. And then he concludes, we are the true spiritual Israel and the descendants of Judah, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham. Rabbi Rachel Mikva, who teaches at the Christian Theological Seminary here, in her book, Dangerous Religious Ideas, puts it this way, that she's not speaking specifically of Justin Martyr, but of the early church here, that originally what the claim was, we Christians, or we followers of Christ, we are Israel also. And then it moves rather quickly to, we are Israel instead. So, in essence, we see with Trypho the lengthy argument. It's 142 chapters long, and it's hard to read because nothing really follows from one thing or to another, and he needed a good editor. But anyway, in effect, his rhetoric constituted a theological takeover. What he did is construct what he thought Judaism was, and then he deconstructed it by contrasting it with what he believed to be the only sure and useful philosophy, the way of Christ. In reading this dialogue, which was more a disputation than a dialogue, it seems to me that he regards Judaism really as an abstraction, as sort of a disembodied philosophy against which he asserts the only true and useful philosophy. Justin evinces no interest in how actual Jews lived in the diversity of Jewish life in the 2nd century. He has no real grasp of how Jews, what they believed, how they practiced. And in a sense, what he has, Judaism here it's an intellectual construct. It's a belief system against which developing Christian self-identity was to be developed and articulated. Now, how much influence this particular document has, it's difficult to assess, but it did survive. And when we read other examples from the history of the early church, we see similar patterns of thought. I can't say they all read or knew of Justin Martyr, but the arguments tended to revolve around many of the same claims. And they became even more problematic in the 4th century, when a number of Christian thinkers, most infamously John Chrysostom, inveighed against Jews themselves. And so I see a critical turn between mid-2nd century and 4th century. And this also has to do with the developing politics of the Roman Empire, It has to do more with the institutionalization of Christianity after the Council of Nicaea in 325 and so forth. So there are many, many contributing factors. But what we have after the 4th century that then becomes a legacy to the medieval time is that many of the leading thinkers in what's really now Christianity as a belief system invade against Jews themselves, sometimes in harsh and callous ways, and thereby contributed to a new genre in Christian literature that's known rather widely as adversus Judaios, against the Jews, or as we might call it today, theological anti-Semitism. Not just anti-Jewish teachings, but homilies and discourses and so forth that were clearly against Jews as a people. Now, to my mind, these early texts have contributed a deficient understanding of Judaism to the church over the ages. And as a result, it has seriously undercut the significance of Jesus' Jewishness. Sure, he may have been born a Jew, but in practical effect, in the view of most, Jesus became a Christian, as did the early disciples and Paul. Historically, however, by mid-2nd century, there was not yet Christianity as a belief system. In my experience in the church, there's a disconnect then. That Jesus is Jewish is acknowledged, but the Judaism into which he was born and circumcised and lived and taught is more often portrayed as mired in the old law, and thereby implication, obsolete. As a result, Judaism is generally referred to only in the past, Christianity in the present and future. Jesus is too often depicted as directing his teaching against the Judaism of his day rather than within Second Temple Judaism. Now, a couple of examples. One comes from a parish bulletin dated February 12, 2023. So I didn't just dig out of my files some, ancient claim. And it was a parish that I occasionally attended outside the New York City environs, but still in the Archdiocese of New York. And this was not said in a homily, it was in a parish bulletin. And I don't know why I read it, because ever since then. But anyway, so the gospel that day had been from the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. So a really central teaching for Christianity. And the Pharisees don't have a big mention in this text, although they come in for a lot of mention in the Gospel of Matthew. But anyway, the parish, so this is what the pastor wrote. It's a little longer citation. I'm not going to read the whole thing because you'll get the point. The scribes and Pharisees were masters of the old law. Now that the Messiah had arrived, they were unwilling to go deeper and move beyond the Old Testament teachings that they often misrepresented. They preferred a black and white approach to morality that had been with them for centuries, and they did not want to change when presented with Jesus' new and higher calling. So in today's reading, we are taught about anger, adultery, and oaths. In every case, Jesus refers to the law as it was taught in the Old Testament, but then elevates it to an entirely new level. And then I'm skipping a little bit. He concludes, thus the primary problem with the scribes and Pharisees is not that they failed to teach the Old Testament properly. Of course, it wasn't called the Old Testament then, nor by Jews today. The primary problem is now that the Messiah has arrived and has ushered in a new time of fulfillment and righteousness, they would not go deeper and would not embrace the fulfillment of the law of God. They were not willing to grow in holiness and embrace the fulfillment of all that had been taught before. Okay. Another example, a happier one, except it's just not that bad. So several years, I think it was 3 years ago, but you know, there's before COVID and after COVID, and you know, so sometime in my recent memory, the Christian feast of Pentecost was on the same day as Shavuot. And you know, I was aware of my friends who were studying, although most of my friends aren't staying up all night studying anymore. And I just thought it was a beautiful juxtaposition. And I was in a parish where actually there was a knowledgeable pastor. And so he mentioned that the Christian feast of Pentecost came out of the Jewish festival of Shavuot. But he didn't go the next stage. He didn't say, and this morning as we sit here in this church, Jews are in synagogue, or they have been studying the law, or you know what. In other words, he knew about the connection historically, but Judaism doesn't seem like a live thing. Now, this is in New York. This is in Westchester County. So in one way, in New York, there's no excuse. Even in Seattle, people know these things. Okay, so here's the problem, I say. To say that Jesus is Jewish, and then to imply, as the pastor does in the bulletin, that Judaism was then and seemingly now remains moribund, empties the Jewishness of Jesus of any significance for Christians today. A Jewish Jesus? Yeah, a fact of his birth. As a present and meaningful claim? No, because once the Messiah had arrived, Jesus somehow seemed to have lost his Jewishness. Part 3 of the first section. Recovering the significance of the Jewish Jesus. Scripture scholars initiated the recovery of a Jewish Jesus in the 1980s. The primary factor in their rediscovery, at least as I look at it, is that they had a profound knowledge of and appreciation for early Judaism, a corrective to what has too often been at best oversimplified and at worst simply wrong judgments about Judaism. I just want to note here that among the many elements of this reorientation were many studies offering a dramatic rethinking of the Pharisaic movement, including that of the late Anthony J. Saldarini, who gave the 1999 Bernardin lecture on the topic of the first century speaks to the 21st century about anti-Judaism. Anthony Saldarini, whom I knew as my colleague at Boston College, was a Catholic scholar of rabbinics. And we truly have a new era with Jewish scholars of the New Testament, Christian scholars of rabbinic literature, and so forth. This is something to have real hope for the future, even if you have, sort of no way of touching into that so much. Tragically, he died way too early of cancer in his early 60s in 2001. Now, today we continue to learn from Jews. And I'm thinking of 3 outstanding books that have been around for a while, and I think they've exercised considerable influence, and I just want to mention them. I happen to notice the ones I chose were all by women. I didn't do that consciously, but I also think that that's another sign of the increase of women exercising scholarly pastoral leadership in both our communities. So in 1999, so quite some time ago, Paula Fredrickson, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And she remains one of the foremost scholars. I read anything I can get my hands on by her. Amy Jill Levine's, many of you know this book, The Misunderstood Jew, 2006. And she is the most prolific of the writers in this, and I'll mention her later. And then Pamela Eisenbaum, Paul Was Not a Christian, authored in 2009. All 3 very readable volumes. And every Christian serious about understanding the New Testament should have and use a copy of the Jewish Annotated New Testament, edited by Amy Jo Levine and by Mark Brettler, and now in a second edition. Cardinal Cupich, could you not only see that every homilist had these books, but that they read them? Could you give them an exam or something? I don't know, but you have here in Chicago also Malka Simkovich at the Catholic Theological Union, a book on discovering Second Temple Judaism. That's a little more technical, but again, wonderful background. Now, it's not just about books. Collaboration among those invested in Jewish Christian issues, friendships between Jews and Christians, both enable learning about the other's tradition in ways that transcend ideas. And here I speak of what has touched me. For me, what friendship means with Jews, means is experiencing aspects of the other's tradition, of the other tradition's breadth and depth. It's lingering long over the Shabbat table, being privy to intense debates about the meaning of Israel or the meaning of a text or the meaning of anything, being privy to life as Jews try to live it in the ordinary existence, witnessing the procession with the Torah scroll and a Shabbat service, taking note of the seriousness with which Jews enter into the high holy days, and sitting Shiva with mourners. In short, being brought into Jewish life. These experiences illumine Judaism in a way no book can. They shed light on Jesus' Judaism. Well, of course, Judaism is not the same today as it was then, but the continuity is profound. Above all, the persistent desire to interpret Torah in the messiness of messiness of lived experience, to lead Torah-directed lives. Barbara Meyer, who is a German Lutheran systematic theologian, lives in Tel Aviv and teaches in Hebrew at the Tel Aviv University Department, has a wonderful book called Jesus the Jew in Christian Memory, and she writes this: the question of who Jesus Christ is today cannot sufficiently be given by Christians alone. You need to know something about Jewish life. A year or so ago, I came across a remarkable essay, 1984 essay, by the late German theologian Johann Baptist Metz. And he has this sentence. I don't think it's a great translation, so it's a little awkward in English, but anyway, I'll read it as it is. Christian theology, he claimed, Christian theology after Auschwitz must at long last be guided by the insight that Christians can form and sufficiently understand their identity only in the face of the Jews. He clarifies immediately, Christian identity is not to be established and ascertained in the face of Judaism, but in the face of the Jews. The early church writers, at least many of them, for all their insight, and they have profound insights, were unable, I think, to truly see the face of the Jews because Judaism was the religious philosophical other. It was a contrast figure against whom they argued or against which they argued, not a people striving to live Torah-directed lives. So let me then move to the second and final concluding section of my lecture on anti-Semitism. It is precisely the obligation to formulate and understand our Christian identity only in the face of Jews that leads me directly to the topic of anti-Semitism. I begin with an image. Several weeks ago, I was walking home from doing some errands, and I ran into a rabbi whom I know somewhat. I know him principally because a number of my friends belong to his shul. And in the course of our conversation, I asked him, you know, it's a big congregation, how are they doing, you know? And he said to me, he's a big, tall man, he said, "We are lacerated." Drawing his hands across his chest, not only in the wake of October 7th, but in the continuing devastation of Gaza. Lacerated. I've never forgotten, I'll never forget this. Now, my interpretation, ripped apart, not only by the unspeakable violence and death, but also by the bitter divisions within and beyond our communities. Rifts, I imagine, exist here in this space as well. I speak as someone who lives 3 blocks from the Columbia campus. I speak as somebody for whom it looks to me like the majority of students at Union Theological Seminary are, quote, all in for Palestine. So I feel this very much myself. So whatever serious differences we may have among us, not just in this room, I don't know about this room, but in our cities and campuses today especially, whether about the status of Israel, about the longstanding tensions between Israelis and Palestinians, some of whom, of course, are Israeli citizens, to the context of the Middle East, whatever. We cannot be but shaken by the vitriolic and virulent anti-Semitism that has emerged with new intensity. And yet, it seems to me, so many remain unmoved by the vitriol and virulence. So, in responding to this, in the face of Johann Baptist Metz, what is it we Christians now have to say in the face of Jews? Well, I'm just going to give it a try for this one Catholic Christian. We might begin by acknowledging that we have no moral high ground from which to speak. Anti-Semitism, no matter how we define it, was without doubt a tragic and, I believe, unintended consequence of the development of Christian identity. Christianity alone does not bear the entire responsibility for anti-Semitism, but neither can it shirk responsibility for denigrating and demonizing Jews with such tragic consequences over the ages. The responsibility Christians must assume for anti-Semitism does not mean that we Christians must keep silent about, for example, Israeli government policy, or to keep silent about Israel's conduct of the war in Gaza. Neither should be equated with anti-Semitism. It does imply to me that whatever criticisms are addressed to or about Israel should at minimum include recognition of its moral quandary. That is, its right as a nation state where half of the world's Jews live to defend itself against Hamas, a militant organization expressly committed to the destruction of Israel, yet hidden among Gazans for whose safety they seem, and flourishing, they seem to have little regard. Moreover, we need to beware of the ways in which time-worn anti-Jewish tropes have resurfaced. What we hear in some of these protests and the comments, oh, you know, the Jews, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. Most people don't know anything beyond an eye for an eye. But that's the Jews, the vengeance. Or some texts in the New Testament that can be easily wrenched out of context. Jews, as in the Acts of the Apostles, stiff-necked, uncircumcised of heart. We're back to circumcision again. Jews as lovers of money. Luke has that about the Pharisees, that they were known as lovers of money. Interestingly, Josephus has a very different perspective on that. And then in Matthew's Gospel, in particular, Pharisees as hypocrites. And then, of course, you can go there and just make the Pharisees representative of Jews. For me, to consider the significance of the Jewish Jesus means, in the first instance, our obligation of doing justice to Jews and their Judaism in the present. Now, to sort of wend my way toward a conclusion, which isn't really not a conclusion, it's kind of like, let me give you time to ask your questions. So, the American Jesuit National Monthly, America, has had a number of articles about this war, and most recently, a Israeli Jew whom I know because we were involved together in a couple of projects, Karma Ben Yohanan, mentioned earlier today, a professor in the Department of Comparative Religion at Hebrew University, has written a response to one of the articles in America, and it's called, There's a right and wrong way for Catholics to criticize Israel. I was just with her in Germany 2 weeks ago. And she makes clear in her article that she has strong differences with the current Israeli government. And she also rejects the equation of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. But there's something in this response that she's written that just really speaks to the moment in my view. So here I quote Karma. My stomach turns when thinking about the hunger experienced by Gaza civilians. It keeps me up at night. It is truly hard to breathe. Indeed, my own Jewish fears and historic traumas worsen this stomachache. I feel that my Jewish and human integrity is at stake in the conduct and implications of this war. But I also realize for the first time the gravity of the threat posed to Israel. What we learned on October 7th is that Israel cannot guarantee the safety of its citizens, and it is fragile. And then here I'm skipping a number of paragraphs. Many of my friends, Jews and non-Jews alike in Israel and abroad, from the right and from the left, are, however, much more certain than I am about all this and how it should be handled. As for me, I am eaten by doubts, trying to reason my way out of this impasse. What I do believe is that some moral and intellectual modesty will not hurt any of us in evaluating the complexity of this situation. In the face of Jews, and in our fidelity to Jesus as the living Torah of God, we Christians have much reason to practice moral and intellectual humility, and to recognize that through the way of Jesus, we too are asked to live Torah-directed lives, albeit in the specificity of the way of Jesus, the Jew from Nazareth, to love God with all that is in us and our neighbors as ourselves. So remembering this evening Joseph Cardinal Bernardin, whom I never met, but for whom I have always had such immense respect. May he guide us, the memory of Bernardin guide us in this. And then Rabbi Geffen, on your website, you have, may the one who makes peace in the high heavens bring peace to us, to Israel, and to all the world, and if you permit me a little midrash, and to Gaza, the Palestinian territories, the one in whom we all believe. So thank you for your attention here on the 187th anniversary of the city of Chicago. It's good that have something older than I am. So I'll let you handle it from here.
Don't go anywhere. You should stay up here. Dr. Boyce, thank you so much for your incredible remarks. I was reminded of something that Professor Stephen Millies said about Cardinal Bernardin, that he taught anyone who has been a recipient of his knowledge and his wisdom how to become more human to one another. It's a line about his legacy that I often think about, and you have demonstrated that notion of how we might become more human to one another in a most powerful way this evening. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us to you. Friends, a few things. So if you have written a question down, please kind of raise your hand and we'll come around and collect them. It's going to take us just a moment to gather them and try to figure out if we have repetition or not. So my suggestion for us is part of the notion of Jews and Catholics coming together is not just to listen to a speaker, but actually to meet one another, to know each other's names and faces. I do want to say that we have some amazing names and faces here in the room. I should say Dr. Malka Simkovich is actually here this evening. She got a shout out in Dr. Boyce's remarks. We also have Father John Polakowski.
Who was with Cardinal Bernardin on that trip to Israel.
Who was with, in case you didn't hear that, who was with Cardinal Bernardin on that trip to Israel, and an immense model of anything that has to do with the possibilities of interfaith, collaborative partnerships, friendships, relationships, certainly in Chicago, if not in our entire country, and just deserves the recognition for everyone to know that he is here as well. And just, we have so many different wonderful people from all over the Jewish community, the Catholic community. Let's just take a few moments. You can turn around where you are. If you see a face you don't know, introduce yourself. Say what brought you here this evening. We can actually cultivate community while we collect some questions. And please just raise your hand. We'll come around and grab them. Yeah, I'm going to get him back. Friends, we'll invite you to, I'm so glad you're all talking. This is great. We'll invite you to come back together. I'm just going to put it at the back. I don't know that we'll get to it. I've got a variety of questions.
All right, you want to read them out?
Yeah, I'm going to read them. I'm
Okay.
just going to pull this down a little bit for you. There you go. Perfect. We have a wide variety of questions and about 10 or 12 minutes for Q&A, so we'll see how far we go. But congratulations, you all did Qs. No A's on the card, so great job. So, Dr. Boyes, first question. This, you'll see it's written by a Jewish person here. As a Jew, I wonder how Catholics can ever embrace Jews when we Jews reject the idea of Jesus as the Messiah. Aren't we fundamentally adversarial?
I think we're fundamentally different.
Oop. Hold on, I think it might. Yep, there you go.
So I think we're fundamentally different. To my mind, adversarial is something altogether. So, you think I'm wrong? Okay. I would never say I think Judaism is wrong. You know, why did God create people in such difference? I believe in a God who embraces difference. And for me does your religious tradition lead you to lead a life of integrity, of living into truth? I don't know what to say about Hinduism or Buddhism, but I know Buddhists in particular, and Jews. I don't know so many Hindus. So Muslims who try to live the truth as they understand it. I don't know the mysteries of the universe. I barely know a little bit about Scripture and a few other things. So, and you know, there's a wonderful phrase, many of you may know it, from the late Christopher Stendhal, who was a wonderful New Testament scholar, dean of Harvard Divinity School for a while, and a bishop of the Lutheran Church in Sweden, which was his home nation. And he used the phrase holy envy. And he doesn't really ever say exactly what it means, which gives us all room. So holy envy is, I see some things in Judaism that I think are not as life-giving in Catholicism. I'll give you one example. Most of Jewish life, as I see it, an outsider, is lived in the home, the Shabbat meal, the way in which, yes, things happen in the synagogue, and I'm not criticizing the synagogue, but it's in the home, and you know, one of my friends who was married to a rabbi, and her father was a rabbi, and her son's a rabbi, and she said, you know, when the kids were little, not so little, but you know, when they were a certain age, we would study together. I'm thinking, well, that's wonderful. I went to Catholic schools, that's where I studied, you know, but, you know, to do it in the home if you can. I realize, look, I've also been to a lot of Seders, for which I am very grateful. You know, Seder's in the home. The kids are crabby and tired and hungry, and, you know, some people race through the Haggadah like, you know, and other people, you know, but it's such a meaningful thing to do in the home for all the messiness that is, you know, something gets burned or, well, you know how it goes. So I don't have an adversarial relationship. I think my Jewish friends want me to be a good Catholic, which I think means having ecumenical and interreligious relations. Okay, that's, you know, I teach. I can go on and on about anything. So, Rabbi Geffen, you interrupt.
I won't. Can you expound upon the differences between Luke and Josephus Flavius as to the Jews, Pharisees, and money, why the Luke view dominated almost 2,000 years of history, and how the Catholic Church in particular can change this very devastating view now through both education and through seeing Jesus through the face of Jews as opposed to the faces of the Pharisees?
Well, one of the things that's happening even in the Catholic Church, or maybe I should say especially in the Catholic Church, is a certain rehabilitation of the Pharisees through scholarship. And in 2019, I don't always get dates right. Well, we have a president who doesn't always get dates right, but that's not the big, that's not the major issue here. There was a conference in Rome on the Pharisees that was attended by Jewish scholars and Christian scholars of all stripes, and probably some scholars who don't affiliate with either tradition but are interested in biblical scholarship. And out of this conference came a hefty tome simply called The Pharisees, edited by Amy Jill Levine and Joseph Sievers, who is a Catholic priest, German Catholic priest, who has just retired from teaching in Rome for many years. And it's not the kind of thing that the average Catholic or Jew would pick up. It's a little heavy on the technical. You're not going to make any documentary film on it or anything like that, but it's a wonderful resource for scholars. And then hopefully what happens is that this changes the teaching along the way. So this project of helping us rethink the Pharisees has been going on for some time. The complexity is, how do you help people who are responsible for teaching and preaching to get there? And because I teach at a seminary that is historically a Christian seminary, well, we also have Muslim and a large number of Buddhist students. I'm not always, in touch exactly with what happens at every Catholic parish, but I would love to see a diocese really make this an important project, namely because the Pharisees appear in our texts that are read on Sundays. And that Pharisees are wonderful temptations for preachers. Because when you're teaching or preaching, there's nothing like having a bad guy to do comparison contrast. Now, the scholarship, what it reveals, just to say this as quickly as I can, is that the argument was not between Jesus, say, in the late 20s or early 30s of the Common Era. We don't know the exact dates, but okay. But rather, it was after the destruction of the temple, when the Pharisees became, in a sense, the sort of the one Jewish sort of what's called an association that is still together and operative. Those groups like the Sadducees and so forth that were more temple-oriented had no temple out of which to exercise leadership. Whoever the people were at Qumran, and the authors of the scrolls found in the Judean desert, I don't know whether the Essene, who knows. Malka, you can tell me later what you think, but so there was contention among them. Thank God there's no contentiousness in Catholicism, nor in Judaism. And so what happened is that in this sort of developing identity between Christ followers, I don't use the term Christian yet because it's not really a Christian church, there are disputes about the meaning of Jesus and the way of Jesus. And these disputes, when the Gospels are written, are sort of retrojected into the life of Jesus. Now, but you need to explain this often, but also not at great length, if you're giving a homily, because, as Jesus says, when you pray, do not pile up words as the Gentiles do. Now that's a text for every homilist. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is it's really hard when you have a large multinational church like Catholicism to continue the process of education and re-education. So, but there are many people doing what they can where they are, and if you could only multiply the number of, if you could only pay for all the people who should be going to graduate school and studying these things. All right.
One clarifying question I think that might be useful for some folks that's articulated here. Who were the Gentiles when Jesus was living? What did they believe in? Who was their God?
When I taught at Boston College, I have to tell this story. When you teach undergraduates, you kind of never know what they don't know until you do know. So this was an introduction to New Testament, and it was kind of a largish class, and so whatever I'd been going on about, and at the break, this young man came up to me and said, "Could you clarify again the difference between a Jew and a Gentile?" Thank God he hadn't asked that in class. So Gentiles, Hagoyim, it's the nations, it's the people who aren't Jews. In Utah, you Jews are Gentiles with us because you're not Mormons. When is a Jew a Gentile? In Mormon territory. Okay, all right. Just an aside. So who were their gods? They were the household gods. And what is, to me, striking is that Jewish life, particularly Jewish worship, was open to non-Jews. So in the temple in Jerusalem, you had the court of the Gentiles. People could go to participate in the life of the synagogue, as not just as proselytes, but as Gentiles, and so Jewish life was very inclusive. It didn't work the other way, because Jews were not permitted to believe in the household gods of various other groups. So there is this distinction between Judaism and the nations. And, this is a problem, because difference leads to denigration very often. Mm-hmm. So may that not be the case in our world now, where religious pluralism is so much needed, and I think our time is expired, and I might be at the expiration date of my own knowledge, so let me quit while I'm ahead.
I highly doubt that. Let's give Dr. Blase a hand. You got a standing ovation in the back. Yeah. Friends, thank you so much for being here. Friends from the Archdiocese of Chicago, thank you for allowing North Shore Congregation Israel to be the host site of this year's Bernardin Lecture. We're so honored to have you here in our community, and thank you for your ongoing friendship. Whatever brought you here this evening, thank you for spending the last 90 minutes with us. We hope we walk away with greater mutual understanding, a greater ability to be more human to one another. And I'm walking away with some hope in an otherwise pretty despairing time, so I'm grateful to both of our speakers this evening for that trope. May it be so. May we enter into a world of deepened peace and possibility for all faiths and all humans. Have a good evening. Be safe. Thank you so much.